All right, here's the systemic circuit from Big Picture Anatomy. Blood returns from the lungs to the left atrium of the heart, passes through that mitral or bicuspid or left atrioventricular valve into the left ventricle, and then the left ventricle, the big major pumping chamber of the heart, pumps blood out the aorta, right up the middle of the heart, and around the aortic arch, and down to the rest of the body. We can zoom in at what's happening as the blood goes through the aortic arch. You can see that we need to get blood out to each of the upper limbs and each side of the head. So there's a right subclavian artery going under the clavicle and becoming the brachial out to the arm. And there's a left subclavian and brachial going out to the left arm. There's also a right, and a left carotid artery. The only difference is as you come off the aortic arch, on the right side there's a common brachiocephalic. Brachio meaning arm, cephalic meaning trunk, trunk, that then splits into the arteries, whereas on the left side you have a separate carotid and separate brachial artery coming off the aortic arch. As we continue inferiorly, you can see that as we go through the abdominal region, we have the dorsal aorta giving off these little segmental arteries. These are going to go out between all of the ribs. They run with those subcostal nerves that go right under the undersurface of each rib. And then as we come through the abdomen down here, realize here's the diaphragm cutting across here. Okay. So there we've got the diaphragm and right across, just inferior to the heart, and then the abdominal organs, which I've drawn in yellow, reflecting the endodermic embryonic origin. So as the dorsal aorta passes through the diaphragm, it gives off two major arteries going into the abdominal organs. The celiac artery that goes to the stomach, the small intestines, the liver, the pancreas, the spleen, all of those organs, therefore celiac, referring to the coelom or the coelomic cavity, and the superior mesenteric artery that goes to the small intestines and most of the large intestines. More inferiorly along the aorta, we have the inferior mesenteric artery going to the very end of the intestines. As we continue to inferiorly, what you can see is the aorta at the end, inferior end of the abdominal cavity, splits into two what are initially called iliac arteries that then become femoral arteries as they go out to the the lower limb on either side. Blood from the inferior part of the body all returns from the limbs, the veins from the lower limb, which there would be named veins, iliac and femoral veins, that would mirror the other limbs, but I just haven't drawn them in. It's too complicated. But we know there would be veins, as well as veins coming off the gut. It's a little bit different because they all pass through the liver and then continue on up. They all come together into what is the inferior vena cava on their way back to the right atrium of the heart. We can also see from the head end that we have a set of veins. Again, the names of the veins would be basically the same, except you have jugular veins instead of carotid veins in the neck, but brachial and subclavian veins coming in from either side. I haven't drawn them, it's too complicated, but there's the veins from the head, the veins from the arm, all coming together through the superior vena cava into the right atrium of the heart. So that's what you see here is the inferior vena cava and the superior vena cava coming into the right atrium of the heart. And that blood, of course, would pass through into the right ventricle and then out the pulmonary trunk to the lungs, which, of course, we haven't drawn the pulmonary circuit here because it's too complicated. This is just the systemic circuit. So, a quick review. What we have in the systemic circuit is going to be blood returning from the lungs to the left atrium of the heart, going through the mitral valve to the left ventricle of the heart, big major pumping chamber incorporating the apex, pumping that blood out the aorta, through the aortic arch, and down the dorsal or descending aorta to the rest of the body. As it goes through the aortic arch, giving off the brachiocephalic trunk, carotid and brachial artery to the right side, carotid artery and brachial artery to the left side, segmental arteries to the outer regions of the body, and then that celiac artery, superior mesenteric and inferior mesenteric to the gut organs, finally splitting into the iliac arteries, becoming femoral arteries down to the feet. All the blood from the lower part of the body returns through the inferior vena cava. All the blood from the upper part of the body returns through the veins to the superior vena cava, back to the right atrium, through to the right ventricle, and those then out to the lungs. Again, from the lungs, that blood would return to the left, after it's picked up oxygen, would return to the left atrium, through to the left ventricle, and out to the rest of the body. I think it goes without saying, but I want to point this out. Everywhere the blood gets pumped to by the left ventricle through the aorta ends out in the tiniest of capillaries, up in the head, up in the arms, I have them labeled as caps, down in the feet, and the lower limbs, not just the feet, the entire limb, and of course all the gut organs, all of those caps. That's where that blood gives up its oxygen to all of the tissues and then returns through the veins without any oxygen or low oxygen to the right side of the heart to be pumped out to the lungs. That's the systemic circuit from Big Picture Anatomy.